And retaliations from Iran reverberating around the Middle East. Kuwaiti officials say Iran targeted oil, electricity, and water facilities. Iran claims it struck a U.S. base in Jordan. CENTCOM has not confirmed this attack. Trump is in New Jersey today. He is attending the World Cup final tomorrow with his family.
What we should do is you should choose the United States of America again. This time we'll leave Mexico and Canada out. Johnny also had another idea. He said we could do it China and the United States for next time. We do them China, United States, so you have a nice short flight in between games.
Well, the president also said he planned to speak today to Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney about wildfire smoke triggering air quality emergencies across several states here in the northeastern U.S. Trump said the cost of the pollution must be added to Canada's tariffs. Also new, the acting Navy Secretary says no reprimands for those Blue Angels flight squadron after an abnormally low, as you can see for yourself, flyover. It was there at Pensacola Beach, Florida, but it turned beach gear into dangerous projectiles. And a new poll on the upcoming House midterm elections, it shows support for House Democrats edging out Republicans among registered voters 48 to 45%, but among energized voters more certain to vote, the lead widens with 53% favoring Democrats. One Trump voter in Iowa offers an explanation to MS Now reporter Alex Tabbitt.
Things are just getting pretty divisive. The stuff you see on social media, people aren't really treating each other with humanity.
What do you make of the fact that we're in 2026 and President Trump is relitigating the 2020 election?
I don't know too much about it, but it's past history. It shouldn't be relevant now.
Why do you think he's focusing on it, and should he be focusing on it?
I think he's planning on messing with this election, using that as a base to do that. I don't think I think he's overstepping.
Let's go to MS Now White House reporter Akayla Gardner. So, Akayla, welcome to you. What can you tell us about the new election security measures the White House is putting into place despite no evidence of any vulnerabilities?
Yeah, Alex, President Trump is turning years of baseless claims into action now. The Trump administration is asking states to review their voter rolls and cross-check them with records maintained by the federal government. They're also asking them to update their security measures. We're still waiting for more information about exactly what that could look like. But typically, states can participate in these kinds of programs on a voluntary basis. But I want you to take a listen to the Secretary of Homeland Security, Markwayne Mullin, talking about consequences for election officials if they don't participate in these programs.
I will tell you, if the states that choose not to participate with the SAVE program and they choose not to participate in securing the elections, we will make sure that we make those states a priority to look at who voted in their states and hold then the election officials accountable. Those individuals can also be held accountable by fines, by penalties, and even, depending on how far it goes, prison time.
Alex, you heard it there for yourself. The secretary is threatening jail time for election officials who do not take part in these programs. And this isn't the first time the administration has thought about prosecuting election officials if they do not comply with their requests. And all of this comes at a time where states are having a hard time recruiting election officials, and Democrats are certainly concerned about efforts potentially to intimidate voters on Election Day. Alex?
Okay, Kayla, thank you so much for that. On the heels of that report, let's bring in Hugo Lowell, senior political reporter for Wired and author of the Inner Loop newsletter. Hugo, come on, threatening jail time for election officials. What is this about?
I think a lot of the Trump administration's actions relate to the midterms, obviously, right? They want to get the Save America Act passed. They don't have the votes for it in the Senate. And so they are trying to turn the screw on states, principally with Democratic governors, so blue states, that they feel like they can really pressure and use federal grants and federal aid as leverage. And of course, this runs counter to how elections are run, because elections are the purview of the state. And it is not in the purview of the federal government, as Trump discovered in 2020 when he was trying to get the Justice Department to open federal investigations into voter fraud. But I think it also shows like the admin writ large is trying very much to turn this into a thing. It's not clear yet whether Trump intends to use his claims about voter fraud, obviously harking back to his primetime remarks on Thursday, to lay the groundwork for saying, you know, if Republicans don't win big in November, if Democrats win the House, it gives them a basis to say, you know, the elections might have been fraudulent.
But look, Trump's repeated election claims of fraud, zero basis in truth. They have been debunked over and over again, most recently by one of Trump's advisors. In fact, Hugo, take a look. This is an exchange that he had with MS Now's Vaughn Hilliard on Thursday. Watch.
So you acknowledge that there were no votes changed in 2020?
All I can acknowledge is what the intelligence shows, right? I only know the intelligence community has zero evidence that someone has flipped that a foreign power flipped a vote in 2020, 22, or 24.
And so the 2020 election was, in fact, the results as we, the American public.
I'm still researching, so let me. This is the first.
But there's no intelligence.
Not yet.
There is no intelligence that the election would have said that Donald Trump was president.
The president said that tonight.
Hey, Hugo, is that guy risking his job by speaking the truth? Is there anyone in the president's inner circle telling him to let this go?
I think there are people inside the president's inner circle saying, you know, we need to focus on more pocketbook issues for the midterms. I think John Solomon will probably be safe in his job. He got some support from people in Trump's orbit immediately after the remarks. And I think that's basically because Trump's primetime remarks really didn't offer anything new. And I think even Trump's staunchest allies would agree with that assessment. I mean, two things that really stood out to me from the primetime speech. Number one, not even Trump was saying that China hacked into the 2020 elections and that he would have otherwise won the election. And the only real evidence that they put forward was China had access to voter rolls that are mainly already public or publicly accessible for a feed. There was some discussion about voting systems and how there was the potential for voting machines to be hacked, but they didn't offer any evidence that the machines were actually hacked. So I think even by the Trump administration's own standards, even by the president's own remarks, they don't get to that point. So I think John Solomon conceding that, no, the election would not have gone in Trump's way were it not for this voter fraud, I think John Solomon's probably treading on safe ground there.
You know, I heard a very interesting analogy to all this on PBS, and it was that this whole voter rolls thing, it's like a class parent having a list of all the kids in the classroom. That list does not allow the parent to change the grades, you know, of the kids. I mean, it was kind of a perfect analogy there. You said how you had interpreted the speech. How about the speech, how it's being received on Capitol Hill, specifically among those Republicans who are fighting to hold on to power ahead of the midterm elections? Are vulnerable Republicans, are they frustrated with the president, or are they concerned about the reaction among their constituents?
Yeah, it does sound like vulnerable Republicans on the Hill have communicated to the RNC and also people in Trump's orbit that the discussion about the 2020 election is just not helpful for the midterms. There's so many other issues that their constituents care about. They care about, you know, gas prices as a result of Trump's war of choice in Iran. They care about people inside the administration betting on Kalshi and Polymarket and making money using kind of inside information to front-run trades. Those are the two things that consistently come back as kind of touch points and concern points for senators and frankly kind of House races that are feeding back into Trump's orbit. And so, you know, it's always a balancing act, I think, for people in the admin. They have to balance, obviously, what Trump wants to put out there and distract from many negative headlines of the week, in this case, probably the resumption of strikes in Iran, with the fact that there are genuine issues that they have to grapple with for the midterms. And, you know, people in Trump's orbit have been telling me for weeks that Trump has simply not been talking about the issues that they need to talk about. And, you know, maybe he can get it out of his system now. And as we get close to the midterms, he can focus on prices, but that has just not been happening.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to stick around, please, because we're going to talk about Trump's new and very curious attack on Canada coming up. But first, joining me right now is our friend Illinois Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi. He serves on the House Oversight and Intelligence Committees. Welcome, Congressman. It's good to see you. So these documents that Trump declassified, they do not back up his claim of vulnerabilities in election systems. They reveal no new evidence of foreign interference and that it altered any vote counts. And then the strict voter ID bill that he's pressuring Congress to pass, that doesn't even address these issues. What was the point of this address?
I think he's trying to set up a pretext, a Trojan horse, if you will, in this day of the Odyssey, to basically meddle in the 2026 elections in 4 months. That's what's really going on. And I think that Markwayne Mullin and DHS, we have to scrutinize them very carefully, because I'm concerned that they are going to potentially invoke emergencies related to the elections, place DHS, ICE, or CBP folks at polling locations to intimidate voters, and do whatever they can to discourage Democrats from voting and others, because they know that they can't win this election right now the way things are.
So you're a senior member of the House Intelligence Committee and the Select Committee on Strategic Competition between the U.S. and China. We all know that foreign adversaries seek to undermine our democracy, but have you ever seen any evidence of a foreign nation changing a single vote or altering the counting of ballots? No.
Not at all. There's not a shred, not an iota of evidence whatsoever that for instance, with regard to the 2020 elections, China flipped one single vote or even attempted to interfere in the either casting of ballots or the tabulation of ballots. So we're left with the same conclusion as before, which is that Donald Trump lost the election fair and square.
All right. So this week, we had MS Now reporting that more than 24 House Democrats gathered to strategize how they would respond if indeed the president tries to interfere in November's vote. What are Democrats doing to make sure the election is fair and secure?
I was part of that exercise. It was eye-opening, and I think I came away with several conclusions. One is that I think that we should anticipate that, Trump and his loyalists are going to do whatever they can to try to meddle in the elections. So what does that mean for us right now? I think we have to work with folks in civic community and not-for-profits in terms of making sure that we continue to encourage people to vote early for the election, because I'm very concerned about election day stunts on the part of the administration. I think we have to work with our legal community to make sure that we can go with one voice into court at the appropriate times if there are needs for injunctions or temporary restraining orders. And then finally, we have to do whatever we can in Congress to sound the alarm right now and conduct oversight with regard to the Trump administration, whether it's DHS or other entities such as the U.S. Postal Service, which is what I'm really focused on the Oversight Committee, to make sure that they are not used as leverage for the Trump administration trying to get a hold of voter registration rolls or kind of meddling in mail-in balloting and so forth. So those are the three broad strategies that we have to use right now.
Is there something specific you worry about when you say an election day stunt that the Trump administration could pull off? What do you envision happening there?
Well, you could see them, basically say that there's an emergency that requires that, DHS agents be placed at polls. Or if a judge says, well, no, you can't have under 18 U.S.C. 592, you cannot have DHS or any federal law enforcement at the polls, then they start setting up checkpoints on roads or highways near those polling locations. And that gums up the works on Election Day. So we should anticipate any of these strategies being employed and start to encourage people right now to vote as soon as they can in these elections, whether it's through mail or voting early in person, but making sure that their votes get in regardless.
Okay. Let's pivot together to Jay Clayton, of course, President Trump's nominee to lead the nation's intelligence community, facing a contentious Senate confirmation hearing on Wednesday where he refused to directly acknowledge Joe Biden's victory in the 2020 election and said he was unaware former intelligence chief Tulsi Gabbard oversaw the FBI search of a Georgia election center this year. How can Americans trust that the intelligence community will remain independent and fact-based if its leader won't publicly acknowledge a settled Democratic outcome?
I'm not sure that we can. I mean, right now we have this guy Pulte, who's the acting DNI, and we sounded the alarm that this guy was basically being put in place to, pull off these election shenanigans, which we saw starting with the declassification of all these documents on Thursday in the run-up to the speech that Trump gave. Now that Clayton is saying he can't say that, Joe Biden was elected, not to mention the fact that, he's not willing to make certain assurances with regard to the DNI's office being used in the way that it's being used right now. I'm not sure that he should be confirmed. Not to mention the fact that, by the way, he, according to Pam Bondi, was in charge of the investigations related to the Epstein affair, investigations which haven't happened. No prosecution, no indictments. So just a lot of questions are coming up with regard to his own confirmation right now.
Yeah. There's also the Senate confirmation hearing this week to lead the Justice Department, acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, where he said mistakes were made in about 1% of the Epstein files released by the DOJ, but then pushed back on accusations that the administration is stonewalling the release of all the files. Take a listen to what Congresswoman Yasmin Ansari said about his statements. Here it is.
Todd Blanche cannot be trusted. He was the one who was managing this entire situation. He is the one who has refused to release the entirety of the Epstein files. He is the one who has doxed survivors and upended their entire lives by releasing their personal information. He's a monster, and Todd Blanche should go to jail and not, he belongs in jail. He should absolutely not be confirmed as the Attorney General of the United States of America.
Okay, a couple questions there. First, do you agree with your colleague? Does Todd Blanche belong in jail? And do you expect him to comply with Republican Oversight Chair James Comer's request to testify?
I'm not sure about jail time, but he doesn't belong in the Attorney General's office, that's for sure. And this meeting that just happened with the survivors was a joke because he wasn't willing to talk about disclosing the rest of the Epstein files, something like 2 to 3 million pages. He didn't talk about unredacting the conspirators' names and fully redacting the survivors' names as he should have. And he didn't, talk about who else is going to get prosecuted. And so for those reasons, I think that he absolutely should not be the Attorney General. He's Trump's attorney. He's not the people's attorney. With regard to testifying before Congress, absolutely, he should voluntarily come before the Oversight Committee. And if he's not voluntarily coming, then we should subpoena him. He has a lot to explain at this point.
Let me tell you, just got word from my executive producer in my ear that CENTCOM has just confirmed 2 U.S. military members were killed in Jordan. This as a result of the ongoing skirmishes with Iran and the back and forth. We do know that Iran had launched missiles or at least drones at Jordan, also Kuwait, also Qatar. But now again, CENTCOM confirming 2 U.S. military members have been killed. I believe that brings the total of U.S. service members killed in this war now to 15, with dozens and dozens more injured. What is your reaction to that news, given the nature of this war and the possibility that it may become a forever war? Because it does not appear that this administration has an exit strategy.
First of all, my deepest condolences to the families of the service members. We pray for their comfort at this very difficult time. Secondly, this is a forever war at this point. This is a quagmire. Neither side, the U.S. certainly cannot militarily resolve the situation. And as a consequence, this illegal and unconstitutional war is dragging us further and further into an economic mess, which is chaotic for consumers. You don't have to go further than your gas pump and see what's happening to individuals as well as the economy. But it's also one of those situations that's making us less safe from a national security standpoint as we push away our friends, partners, and allies, and essentially get into the situation where Iran has an economic chokehold and increasingly is exacting military costs on us as well.
The president has said repeatedly that the Iranian military has been destroyed. The evidence today suggests otherwise. What does it say about Iran's military capability now that you can look at our map? I'm not sure, sir, if you can see it, but we have highlighted Oman, Kuwait, Jordan, all of which were recently targeted and struck by Iran. Again, these 2 U.S. service members having been killed in Jordan. What does it say? How does the president even continue making those claims that are absolutely baseless?
He's lying. Look, they have thousands of drones. They have thousands of ballistic missiles. They have the capability to continue to hurt us and, of course, our partners in the region, but also our interests in the region. And I think that I should just say one other thing, which is we're doing nothing to reduce Iran's leverage over us either. At a time when they have a stranglehold over our economic kind of energy lifelines, we should be weaning ourselves off of fossil fuel. We should be doing everything we can to kind of turbocharge our renewable energy efforts, and those have been axed as well. And so we're just in this terrible mess. And I think that, by the way, is in part why the president is trying to distract attention from this and talking about election security issues and anything else. But what people are really concerned about, which is this Iran war, their pocketbooks, and the future of our country.
At the start of this war, there was overwhelming military might that was launched against Iran. The hope being, according to the president, when he said it would take 4 to 6 weeks to wrap this up and win this war with Iran. The fact that we are returning now to increased military targeting of Iran, it would seem that what did not work at the beginning is the playbook that is being used right now for a second time. Is there anything that indicates to you that it'll work this time?
No, I don't see it working, and it's not working. And by the way, we're also depleting our munitions in the process. We're depleting our SM-3 interceptors. We're depleting our THAAD interceptors. We're depleting the other Tomahawk missiles that are on our guided missile destroyers. Those are crucial for warding off our adversaries and our general military deterrence with regard to our adversaries. And so not only are we not achieving any military objectives right now with regard to Iran, I believe that we're reducing our military deterrence and inviting potential aggression against us in other theaters around the world. It's just a gosh darn mess at this point.
How do you see this ending? When do you see this ending?
It only ends when we basically do a few things. One is, I think we have to go back to the table, remove the blockades, the mutual blockades, which don't make any sense and which hurt us economically. Secondly, we have to bring our friends, partners, and allies to the table and negotiate against our specific objectives, similar to what happened with the JCPOA. Nothing is going to happen here unless everybody is at the table. And if we go it alone and then Trump further exacerbates the situation through his tweets and his other posturing, it just undercuts our ability to resolve this. And then third and finally, I go back to my point, which is we got to reduce Iran's leverage over us, okay? Their continued stranglehold on our our energy supplies is in part why they feel so confident that they can kind of weather what's happening to them right now and get us to feel more pain than they are and get us to make more concessions as well.
Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthy, I really thank you for the conversation, particularly addressing this breaking news, the tragedy of 2 U.S. troops having been killed by Iran in a Jordanian attack. Thank you very much, sir. We are going to be right back with a bit more on this breaking news. Everybody, stay with us. 26 past with this breaking news amid new escalations in the Middle East. In just the last few minutes, we have learned 2 U.S. troops were killed in Jordan yesterday as U.S. Central Command and partners defended against Iranian ballistic missiles and drone attacks. Those names have not yet been released. Also breaking news at this hour, the Iranian Supreme Leader releasing a scathing statement after a 7th straight night of U.S. strikes. And it reads in part, the violation of the agreement once again proved the worthlessness and invalidity of the U.S. president's signature. Hugo Lowell is back with me. So first of all, Hugo, how significant is this escalation? The fact that we've lost also 2 more U.S. service members. We also report 1 is missing in action at this point. Are we closer to an all-out war? Are we there already?
I think it's always significant when, we lose lives, and 2 service members is not nothing. I mean, when you add it to the total of people that we have lost over the duration of this conflict, I mean, it keeps adding up. I was there for one of the dignified transfers. In fact, the first of dignified transfers of the KC-135 crew that was lost when one of the tankers was, basically crashed after an incident midair. I think we're already there, Alex. I think we're already back to a resumption of full hostilities. Trump has basically said as much. The administration has sent a notice to Congress saying we are back at a conflict, and the 60-day clock for the admin to take unilateral action is ticking again. So I think we are absolutely back in a conflict. The question is, there is just no clear exit out of this. It's the options are the same right now as they were 1 month, 3 months, 6 months ago, which is, how does the United States apply more leverage on Iran than currently exists? Clearly, continuing to bomb Iran has not produced the sort of leverage that would lead to a deal. We know that because the memorandum of understanding and the ceasefire to produce a deal didn't result in anything. And even though we have re-implemented a naval blockade of Iran's ports to stop their traffic coming in and out, we reported, and others reported weeks and months ago, that Iran had come up with ways to stockpile their oil and to ship it out in other methods, or to have it stored in offshore tankers. I mean, there's so many different ways for Iran to mitigate the economic pressure that we're putting on them with the blockade. It does seem that we are back at a stalemate.
And when you hear what Iran's Supreme Leader said today, specifically about the president, does the MOU hold any significance now? I mean, what happened to the ceasefire and potential peace talks? Are any of these things still on the table, or is that impossible when you are dropping bombs in both directions?
I think 2 things. I think, first of all, Iran coming in saying the MOU was not, worth the paper it was written on because of Trump. That's a little rich, because it was Iran who was kind of harassing shipping through the Strait of Hormuz while the ceasefire was going on first. So clearly, Iran has been in violation of the MOU at the outset. And, there's a lot of blame that goes around to Iran as well. That being said, the position of this admin for months now has been, the Iranians are split into 2 camps. There's the leadership that really wants to negotiate and strike a deal, and there are remnants of the IRGC that does not want to strike a deal, and that's why they're harassing. And we just have to make sure that we're continuing to talk with the leadership. This letter suggests that Iran is now of one mind, and that no one in Iran wants to negotiate with the United States and with Steve Witkoff and J.D. Vance and Jared Kushner. And I think that's the most concerning thing is, is it the case now that no one in Iran wants to strike a deal? Because previously we were of the mind that at least some elements of the political leadership were interested in a deal.
And Hugo, you have reported that intelligence officials predict the Pentagon's cost for the Iran war will top $100 billion. How did they get to that number, since the Trump administration has not disclosed its own estimates?
Yeah, the last time we heard from a senior Trump administration official was Jay Hurst, then the acting comptroller at the Pentagon, in an oversight hearing, when he said the cost of the Iran war, this was in May, was about $29 billion. We have since learned that at the time that he was testifying, the intel community thought it was about 50 to 100 billion. Now, with the resumption of hostilities, the projection is way over 100 billion. And that's kind of coming in multiple parts. It's operational costs of the aircraft carrier steaming around, it's the munitions costs. But there are two elements of why this cost is not final yet, which I want to touch on. One is that the Pentagon has not acknowledged the total number of aircraft that we have lost. And their position to Congress is, well, we haven't decided if we're going to replace all of the lost or damaged aircraft. And if we decide not to replace certain aircraft, we're basically going to write that off and assume that the cost is zero. That's pretty creative accounting in my book, and I've never seen a war accounted in that way before. The second thing to note is what you see today with the bases is there is going to be a lot of construction costs or repair costs associated with bringing these bases back online in the region. For instance, in Jordan and Oman and a whole bunch of other places, and that will add to the total cost as well.
Okay. Great reporting on that and wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, Hugo, for both parts of the conversation and helping us through this breaking news, which everyone we're going to stay on top of as we get more information about the 2 U.S. troops killed by Iran in that attack in Jordan. We will bring that to you. Meantime, inside the room, when Todd Blanche met Epstein survivors, what you might not have heard. Epstein survivors were left stunned and angry after a meeting with Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche. Republican Senator Thom Tillis issued an ultimatum to Blanche to take that meeting if he wants to win his vote at the committee stage of the confirmation hearings. Survivors knocked Blanche for his approach to the meeting, saying he was abrasive and condescending. Blanche said the meeting was, quote, not all cordial, adding survivors want some form of justice. He does not think he can deliver. Here's how another survivor described Blanche's tone.
It was demoralizing, to say the very least. He completely talked around questions. He didn't give transparent answers. It felt like more political posturing and using survivors the way that we've been used as political pawns.
Joining me now is Jess Michaels, performer, educator, entrepreneur, and survivor who was in the room for that meeting. Jess, I'm glad to see you as always, but I want you to take us behind the scenes. How did Blanche set the tone after survivors in some cases had waited, 30 years for a meeting like this? Did you sense that he cared about pursuing justice, or did he take the meeting for the sake of saving his nomination?
It was very clear he was taking the meeting because he wants this promotion. Because initially what was passed off to us was meeting with his assistant. And when we said no, he then scrambled and he said, okay, well, I could be there before 2 o'clock, but we had already left the Capitol. And so we couldn't get there before 2 o'clock. And we requested another meeting. And finally, he agreed to personally meet with us at 4:30 in the afternoon on Thursday. And I mean, I think his attempt at empathy and compassion really came off as patronizing and condescending. So I did not feel that he was a public servant there addressing crime victims that experienced horrific abuse, not just from the person that had abused us, but from the system that was supposed to protect us. There was no acknowledgement of that part of the story.
I'm curious how long the meeting lasted. He met you about 4:30? How long were you all with him?
Yeah, it was supposed to be 30 minutes, and we kept him there till 6 o'clock, till pretty much 6 o'clock. It was a long meeting. It was very tense. There was, I have to tell you, we agreed on one thing. There was one thing that everyone in the room agreed upon, which was interesting. He agreed that the previous FBI agencies had just completely botched the investigation. And I said out loud, I said, yes, I said there was a lack of investigation, like when we gave leads. And he said, yes. And he pointed to me and he said, yes, a lack of investigation. And my next question, but then I didn't get a chance to ask it because we were cut off. My next question was going to be, if this Department of Justice agrees that this was a botched FBI investigation over 20 plus years, who investigates the FBI when they botch investigations, when we're sitting there telling you that the information is in the files? And he could not agree that there were any existing leads in the files as they are right now. He would commit to nothing. He would not commit to looking for the rest of Maria's report that she gave in 1996. He wouldn't commit to any hope for us, or any good faith measure of, hey, we've got the files, sure, let me get a team on it to look through it. We hear you. So if you just keep saying there's nothing there, we're not going to investigate this, that's somebody not hearing you over and over and over again. And it's extremely frustrating.
Another aspect of the files is that Annie Farmer pointed out Blanche refused to release DOJ documents on internal discussions about charging Epstein, adding that explanations for his 9-hour interview with Ghislaine Maxwell and then her transfer to a less secure prison were dissatisfactory and contrived. I mean, these seem like reasonable requests. Did he go anywhere near answering those?
He did not. And I can't tell you how many different times and how many different ways the survivors in the room that had their information leaked, no matter how many ways they described how harmful it was, he could not take responsibility for that at all. In fact, he seemed confused why we had demanded him and not his human trafficking expert. He couldn't seem to understand, like, well, I don't really know what it is you want from me. I didn't ask you guys to commit to anything, so I'm not going to commit to anything. He really evaded responsibility by being confused about why we were even there and why we were talking to him.
You know, you bring up a good point, and I want to have our director, Josh, play the soundbite from Danielle Bensky. She is a teacher, but she is one of those who had unredacted details about her life released. Josh, let's play this.
These documents contain disturbing yet incomplete accounts of my abuse. They were available not only for the entire world to see, but my child, my students, my friends, my employers, my colleagues, and my family. It was humiliating. Worse, my FBI 302 exposed a Jane Doe who had fought for decades to conceal her identity. It's been absolutely devastating.
How did Blanche defend that?
He didn't. He didn't respond to any of those concerns. Again, he minimized what we were saying. He kind of glossed over it, and it felt like we were hitting a brick wall when we were trying to talk with him about, but what about this? But why can't you look at that? You know, we were giving him information that he could have talked with us about, but we were gaslit, we were skipped over. It was frustrating, to say the least.
Jess Michaels, thank you for coming on and illuminating so much that we just don't know about. It was important that you do so, and we will see if there's any reaction on Capitol Hill from those who have to consider his confirmation coming up, thanks to what you've talked about. Thank you. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Meantime, 2 midterm headlines to watch for Democrats, the Great Divide, and a new poll on which party is more energized. A stunning new poll is showing stark differences in how voters see the extremes of both major political parties. A CNBC poll this week suggests Americans are more willing to vote for a self-described Democratic Socialist candidate than a self-described MAGA supporter. Both political labels are generally unfavorable, but it comes as Democratic Socialist and progressive candidates surge in primaries ahead of the midterms. Let's bring in Democratic strategist and former Obama campaign manager Amisha Cross and former advisor to Speaker John Boehner and founder at BlueStack Strategies, Maura Gillespie. I'm glad to have you both here. Amisha, your reaction, what does this tell you about the shift in politics we're seeing right now?
Well, it tells me a few things. And the first is that Democratic socialists are speaking to the needs and the desires of the American public and have captured them in a way that both major political parties typically have a harder time doing. I will say that a Democratic socialist is still a Democrat. So just putting that banner out there, they still fall under the Democratic Party and run on the Democratic ticket. What they have been able to do is showcase that they're paying attention to those affordability cries and concerns, which we know Donald Trump said is a Democratic hoax, which we know that when faced with calls about lack of being able to put food on the table, parents who weren't able to provide Christmas gifts and things for their kids during the holiday season. His answer was buy fewer dolls. When school starts back, buy fewer pencils. Also, just eat less. The American public right now is really frustrated because they're saying that they cannot afford basic everyday necessities. And this is very real. And Democratic socialists are running on things like, lowering the cost of living, ensuring that affordability exists for electric bills and other utility bills, changes to grocery store pricing, things that make sense, rental freezes and decreases in the cost of living when it comes to housing supports. We want to make sure that, and I think both parties should pay attention to this, that Americans can actually live out and see the American dream. But even if the biggest and loudest dreams among them can't be heard, that there isn't a person in this country who works 40 hours plus a week who cannot afford to have a place to stay. I think that the Democratic socialists are really tapping into this synergy and energy around the campaigns that the people themselves are running to raise the alarm. And that they're also speaking to what I would argue Donald Trump did as well during his 2016 and the last 2024 run. No more endless wars. And guess what? He walked us into yet another one.
Mara, this poll also shows voters prefer Dem socialists over candidates endorsed by President Trump. Will Trump's endorsement hold the weight in November that it once did?
No, and I think that poll reflects that. I think right now what you're seeing is dissatisfaction with what was promised and not delivered upon, right? The American people are not seeing this golden age of America that was promised to them. I also think that they are struggling to comprehend why the president has enriched himself, why the administration that is supposed to be here to crack down on fraud, waste, and abuse is abusing the taxpayer dollars and fraudulently, wasting them on things that do not benefit or impact our economy in a positive way. And so I think that is probably what you're seeing in reflection of this poll. But also, we had what people would consider an establishment in Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. They didn't see the economy improving. Trump came back in promising to make the economy better. He did not deliver. And so they're looking for somebody else who will actually get the job done. I think it's a very basic thing to ask for our public servants to serve the public. And at this stage, people just want the economy to improve and for life to get better, be able to afford a home and their groceries and gas. It shouldn't be this hard. And I think that's where people are struggling to understand why it's so hard to get a good leader, people who actually want to do the job right now.
Yeah, both of you delivered some powerful statements on all this. I have to apologize for the brevity. We're going to have to move on given the breaking news that we've had out of Jordan with the death of 2 U.S. service members. But thank you both for joining us. We do have some major new developments as well on those American troops killed by Iran. We'll bring them to you next. Top of the hour with a good day to all of you from MS Now headquarters here in New York's Times Square. Welcome to Alex Witt Reports. We begin with breaking news on day 140 of President Trump's war in Iran. Confirmation from U.S. Central Command that 2 U.S. service members were killed in Jordan Friday while defending against Iranian ballistic and drone missiles. 2 are reported killed in action. 1 is reported still missing in action. 4 American service members were medically evacuated to Jordanian hospitals. They have since been discharged. Earlier, Iran reported it had fired on a U.S. base in Jordan on the 7th straight night of tit-for-tat fire between Iran and the U.S. CENTCOM says it will withhold the identities of the fallen service members until their families are notified.
My deepest condolences to the families of the service members. We pray for their comfort at this very difficult time. Secondly, this is a forever war at this point. This is a quagmire. Neither side, the U.S. certainly cannot militarily resolve the situation. They have thousands of drones. They have thousands of ballistic missiles. They have the capability to continue to hurt us and, of course, our partners in the region.
We have reporters and analysts in place. They're covering all of today's breaking news for us. We're going to start with MS Now's Julia Jester, who covers the Pentagon and national security for us. So, Julia, what more do you know at this time about the deaths of these two U.S. service members?
Well, Alex, all that we know so far is that the two who were killed in action were in Jordan, and the U.S. has partnerships with bases in Jordan. There are a lot of U.S. personnel in that country, and we do know that the government of Jordan for the past several weeks has said that it has been intercepting missiles targeting U.S. bases. So it has been a joint effort between the United States and the government of Jordan to really prevent incoming fire from injuring U.S. personnel. But unfortunately, as we've seen today, that has been not 100% foolproof of a plan here. And we do know that 4 American service members were also medically evacuated to Jordanian hospitals. They've been discharged. There are other personnel with minor injuries, and there's also another service member missing in action. And so this would mark the 15th and 16th service member who have been killed, the second and third in the matter of a few weeks since, the full-scale war was reportedly not a thing anymore. We were in the ceasefire, and clearly that has completely fallen apart. Earlier this month, a Navy pilot died after a helicopter made an emergency landing in the Arabian Sea. That pilot went missing, but was later determined to be deceased. And so what this news shows is that Iran's capabilities are not fully degraded. Iran is still not only able to cause damage to bases, to scare its neighboring countries, but it can cause real and deadly damage to U.S. forces, Alex.
Yeah, can I ask you quickly, Julia, that one pilot that you just referenced, the one who was lost at sea, was that pilot recovered? Do we know for certain?
We do know that the identity of the pilot had been released. At this point, I don't believe that family has gotten full closure with that incident, which just goes to show you how difficult it is to navigate those waters, to conduct those search and rescue missions. They did conduct quite a lengthy search and rescue mission, but eventually had to call it off due to the circumstances in the theater. And so it's not just these troops who are at these bases in these neighboring countries. It is the troops that are on ships at sea and conducting these patrols of the Strait of Hormuz, of all of these waterways around the surrounding areas of Iran. So it is just quite a full-scale operation with a lot of risks, even as we talk about what comes next. Is it boots on the ground? Is it an invasion? But even without that, this is a war that has deadly, deadly risks and consequences. Alex.
Absolutely. And so that will bring now the total to 16 of U.S. military members that have been declared dead, have been killed in this war with Iran. Julia, thank you for that. I know you'll stay on target, and if there's anything that you learn, please come back and let us know. Meantime, we're going to move to the White House and MS Now reporter Akayla Gardner. So, Akayla, have we heard anything from the White House on these military deaths? And then also, in just this last hour, with the Iranian Supreme Leader sending that strong message to the president, if you can address both, please.
Yeah, Alex, we have reached out to the White House and we have yet to hear back. And President Trump has not yet spoken on these deaths of 2 U.S. service members in Jordan. But historically, the U.S. military does respond in these situations when Americans are killed in a conflict. So I certainly would expect a response sometime soon, and we will certainly bring that to you when we get it. But this comes at a time when Iran's supreme leader has just put out a written statement saying that the president's signature is, quote, worthless and invalid because the U.S. continues to breach that memorandum of understanding, that agreement that has essentially fallen through now. We're no longer really in a ceasefire. We continue to see fighting in the Strait of Hormuz. And as you saw with these 2 service members killed in Jordan. And I've spoken to White House allies. Our colleagues have spoken to Republicans on the Hill. They are frustrated that this deal had fallen through, frankly, and it was seen as a major breakthrough when we had the U.S. and Iran signing it. And many people have pointed out the fact that forever wars do not start as forever wars. And the president promised that this operation would just last a few weeks. We are now talking about months. I want you to take a listen to a Democrat who serves on the House Intelligence Committee talking about the consequences.
As a consequence, this illegal and unconstitutional war is dragging us further and further into an economic mess, which is chaotic for consumers. It's also one of those situations that's making us less safe from a national security standpoint as we push away our friends, partners, and allies.
And Alex, as we were reminded today, it's not just economic consequences at the gas pump. There is thousands of U.S. troops who remain in the Middle East. And sadly, today we learned of 2 service members who are now lost and suffered the consequences of this ongoing war. Alex?
Yeah. All right. Michaela, thank you so much from the White House. Joining me now, we have former Pentagon official and senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, Elizabeth Dent. Welcome back to the show, Elizabeth. So we have these tragic deaths today. Where do you anticipate the war is headed now?
I mean, first of all, let me just say that my thoughts are with the service members and their families. This is a horrible and tragic development. And for the United States, it represents very likely a red line. So my assumption is that now that this has occurred, these escalation threats that President Trump has been saying over the last several days are very likely to come to fruition because of these deaths. I think, the United States will have to be very deliberate, lawful in their response and have it be tied to a very clear objective. But what is going to be most important moving forward is ensuring the safety of these service members. And that will also mean having additional defenses come in.
When you talk about a clear, precise objective, what might that look like?
Well, unfortunately, the objective of this war has changed pretty frequently over the last 6 months. What I think originally what we were looking at was some sort of regime change war. President Trump said that he wanted to ensure that Ayatollah was gone. That did occur, but that did not result in any sort of meaningful regime change in Iran. What I think we're looking at now is before these service members died, we were looking at a place of getting back to the negotiating table, using the memorandum of understanding as a sort of basis to move forward. Right now, given the deaths of these service members and the fact that the United States is very likely to escalate now, Iran has also been on the record saying that they would also in turn escalate. So I think we're not out of the woods here. I think that right now the objective should be the United States will very likely respond, and then we'll need to try to find an off-ramp to de-escalate in the region again.
In addition to all of that, and you're correct, senior advisor to Iran's supreme leader had said that indeed if the U.S. continues its attacks any further for another few days, Iran will start a full-scale offensive operation. But then you have today, according to the Associated Press, an Iranian negotiator has said that Tehran is officially suspending its commitments under the MOU. But my question to you, Elizabeth, the president has repeatedly said he has destroyed Iran's military. Of course, we're seeing evidence that is not true today. But to what extent does Iran still have operations that can withstand that which the United States might launch their way now?
I mean, if Iran's capability has been reduced, which I think at this point we can say that it has been, it's not as if our airstrikes have not done anything. That's worth acknowledging. But weakening capabilities is not the same as eliminating the threat. And for Iran, the ability to conduct asymmetric warfare in a way that just simply poses a threat to the region, poses a threat to the economy, that's all they have to do. The United States is a more conventional military, so it is much more difficult for us to show sort of our progress moving forward. Asymmetric warfare is exactly how Iran imposes these costs. So even if they maintain the ability to launch drone swarms or some of the ballistic missiles or even just projectiles, their ability to threaten, to be able to penetrate air defenses in Gulf countries, hit energy facilities, desalination facilities, which they have just done in Kuwait over the last 24 hours. That's what poses this real threat. And that's a much harder thing to completely take care of. So I think we can acknowledge that there has been progress, but clearly Iran still retains quite a few capabilities.
So even though Donald Trump claims that Iran has been defeated, he said on Tuesday the U.S. is prepared to expand attacks next week, and that includes targeting Iranian power plants if diplomatic efforts fail. First of all, Can diplomatic efforts even be underway under these circumstances, anything that could produce anything substantive? And Reuters has also reported that Iran asked the Houthis to disrupt shipping in the Red Sea if power plants are hit by the United States. We know the U.S. expanded strikes on bridges, targets around the country as well, but let's add the implications of the Red Sea being impacted. So putting all this together, where's this going?
Certainly, it's a really concerning development. I think the United States is very likely to pursue targets in that arena. One thing that we didn't see yesterday when the Iranians asked the Houthis to be on guard to close the Bab el-Mandeb, which is in the Red Sea, which post October 7th, 2023, they did start launching projectiles at shipping vessels that were transiting the Bab el-Mandeb. So it's very likely they could do something like that again. But what we didn't see from the Houthis was an acknowledgement or a commitment to do so if the Iranians actually asked them to. The Houthis are a little bit of a different proxy than some of the other proxies like Hezbollah and Hamas. They see themselves as a little bit more independent. That's not to say that they won't cooperate with the Iranians. Certainly, I think that they will, but we just haven't seen that full-on commitment to do so. I think that there's still quite a few steps in the escalatory ladder. I think we're watching as they all sort of play out. I don't think we're off of it yet, and I don't expect us to step back anytime soon.
Very quickly, Elizabeth, is there any reason to even talk about resuming negotiations at this point? What would have to happen for them to be effective?
Of course. I think diplomacy should always be the first instinct here. Now, obviously, given the status of what's going on in the region, that is much more difficult to do. But that doesn't mean that the countries who were helping to pull the United States and Iran together to the negotiating table can't be helpful this time around. Pakistan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, they can all step back in and either put pressure on Iran or put pressure on the United States in order to have them return to the negotiating table and restart those diplomatic agreements.
Okay, Elizabeth Dent, we will have you back again because this shows no signs of letting up. Thank you very much. When, not if, how Democrats are planning for potential midterm election interference by President Trump. Back in 90 seconds. On President Trump's war in Iran and the confirmation from U.S. Central Command that 2 U.S. service members were killed Friday in Jordan. Officials say that 2 were killed in action. 1 is reported still missing. 4 were medically treated for minor injuries and discharged. Joining me now is our friend Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury, member of the House Oversight and Natural Resources Committees. Congresswoman, welcome back to the show. First, your reaction to this terribly sad news from CENTCOM.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is just absolutely devastating to lose service members in the line of duty. It just breaks my heart, especially coming from a family of veterans. I mean, it's just tragic. And I think it just reinforces the reality that the United States should never have been pulled into this conflict to begin with, and that Donald Trump is waging an illegal war that is costing the lives of our service members, thousands of civilians across the Middle East, and billions in taxpayer dollars. And he is currently asking Congress for more money, and we need to tell him no, absolutely not. We have already passed multiple war powers resolutions to stop this war, and it needs to stop.
Iran has certainly intensified its rhetoric in the last 24 hours. So what options does the president have remaining? Is there any way to prevent a wider escalation?
I mean, like I said, I think that the United States should have never gotten involved in this conflict to begin with. In fact, we know that the president was advised by his own national intelligence advisors and others to not get involved in this war. There were no clear objectives from the beginning. And over the last several months, we have seen a president that has flailed to even outline objectives for how to bring the conflict he did start to a close. But it is absolutely imperative that Congress step in, that my colleagues across the aisle who have been too weak to actually stand up to the president step in at this moment and to advise him to pull back, to stop this war, to remove our troops, and to stop the escalation of violence in the Middle East.
Let me pivot to what happened on Thursday when the president delivered a speech detailing those unfounded claims of election interference. What were your takeaways from his remarks?
Well, I think my takeaways are similar to what we've seen over the last 6 years, and that is that Donald Trump is a sore loser, and he cannot take that he lost the 2020 election. But it's really important that the American people understand that this is bigger than just Donald Trump relitigating his 2020 false election denialism claims. He is really setting the groundwork in motion for 2026. And that is because Donald Trump is losing right now. Across the board in every major national poll, we know that Republicans and Donald Trump are going to lose the midterms. And it's because they have passed historically unpopular legislation. They have gutted healthcare. They have gutted food assistance. They've gutted education. They've given kickbacks to billionaires. The president has been looting our national treasury. He's fighting this illegal war in the Middle East, and the economy is in shambles for working people. And so they know that they can't win on the merits of their policies, and that's why the president is giving a national address, trying to call into question what is happening with the election, trying to call into question integrity of our election systems. And it's why he's pushing to pass the Save America Act, which would disenfranchise tens of millions of Americans. So we know this is all about cheating. We know this is all about Donald Trump's ego. And we know that this is laying the pretext for his attempt to try to deny the election outcome, which he is poised to lose.
MS Now reports more than 24 House Democrats held a secret strategy session on plans to counter the Trump administration if it does try to interfere with the midterm election process. So the issue has been a consistent concern, but the tenor of these conversations, Congresswoman, is it becoming more of a when, not if?
Well, the House Democratic leadership and caucus has been meeting for months with partner organizations to address the ongoing attacks that we've seen in the election system, whether that is preparing litigation and these attacks on voting redistricting that have happened all over the South in the wake of the Calais decision by the Supreme Court. We've been preparing lawsuits in a worst case scenario in case something does happen around Election Day. And yes, we have been working with states and local governments and amongst ourselves to prepare for a worst case scenario. And I think that the president's address ups the ante and the alarm bells that he is potentially plotting to do something around the election. But it's also important to know that we've seen this story before. We saw January 6th. We saw the way he tried to take the 2020 election. And I think there are already rumors around Washington, D.C. that he and his allies could be potentially plotting something similar in terms of denying the election results and trying to stop the counting of election votes in the Congress next January. So we are preparing all scenarios, and we have to take these threats very seriously.
Absolutely. Let's pivot to Jay Clayton, of course, Trump's pick for Director of National Intelligence, who was on Capitol Hill for his Senate confirmation hearing. Here's how he responded to questions about the 2020 election.
Answer the question. Who won the 2020 election?
I have answered the question.
Answer it. What is your answer?
I've given you my answer.
What is your answer? You refuse to answer a basic question about who won a presidential election, but you asked to lead America's intelligence community? Isn't it humiliating to be unable to answer this question, to have to indulge the president's delusions?
How concerning is this exchange? Is it a foreshadowing of Clayton's likely tenor if he is confirmed as DNI?
Yeah, and I think it's ironic that that exchange happened the day before the president gave his address to the nation, in which he announced that he was declassifying intelligence reports that came through the DNI coordination process. So it is absolutely alarming. The fact that he is talking about appointing and trying to confirm somebody who will not even admit that Donald Trump lost the 2020 election, and we see that Donald Trump is trying to use national security and intelligence information to substantiate his election denialism claims. These things are intimately intertwined. But I also want to note that Jay Clayton, in addition to his refusal to admit the 2020 election results was also involved in the Trump administration's lack of prosecution of the Epstein investigation. In fact, when we questioned Pam Bondi just a few weeks ago in her recorded transcribed interview in front of the Oversight Committee, she continued to note that Jay Clayton was the attorney who had been assigned by the Trump administration to investigate Epstein claims that never happened. So I think that the Senate should soundly reject his nomination. If you cannot speak truth about the fundamental basics of American democracy, you have no business serving at the head of national intelligence.
I have one more question relative to Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, who, of course, is another Trump pick who's facing hard questions. During his Wednesday confirmation hearing, Republican Senator Thom Tillis told Blanche to meet with Epstein's victims or don't expect his support. Blanche complied, but in a statement, Epstein survivor Annie Farmer said, "I found him abrasive, condescending, and intentionally non-committal, a marked contrast to his public testimony during his confirmation hearing." Will this hurt his chances of getting confirmed, or will the non-committal forced appearance be enough for senators to give their support?
I mean, I think we've been clear since day one. Todd Blanche has no business serving as the Attorney General, whether it is his failure to comply with the Epstein Files Transparency Act, the slush fund he tried to create, the pardons of January 6ers, and the fact that he even claimed during his confirmation hearing that he is the president's personal attorney. He has weaponized the Attorney General's office and should not be serving. But will ultimately Republicans block his nomination? I think that we have seen very little evidence to date that even though they ask hard questions in these confirmation hearings, they have not yet blocked any of his major nominations, except for Bill Pulte, who was clearly unqualified to serve in national intelligence. So I think the jury is out, but we will find out within the next week.
We will. Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury, it's always good to talk with you, my friend. Thank you so much. What Donald Trump didn't say in that speech the other night and why that's also making headlines. Next. A new reaction to President Trump's relitigation of the 2020 election and attempts to shape the upcoming midterms. Overnight, Trump further pushed unsubstantiated claims on his social media platforms. Michigan State Attorney General Dana Nessel shut down Trump's claims earlier today.
So, of course, he's already trying to sow the seeds of doubt in our elections and to undermine people's faith in the safety and the security of our elections. We're prepared to go into court as quickly as possible in order to defend the rights of our voters and our poll workers and our clerks and our secretaries of state who are under threat by this administration.
Let's bring in former communications director for Representative Hakeem Jeffries, Michael Hardaway, and former Trump State Department appointee and MS Now political analyst, Matthew Bartlett. Good to see you both. So, Matthew, you were less than impressed, shall we say, with the president's speech, and you say what stood out most was what Trump didn't talk about. So explain what he missed and your other takeaways.
Yeah, Alex, the president and the White House pumped up this speech, bigger than the Goodyear blimp, wanted to somehow make new claims around the 2020 election. And then the speech, once again, overpromised and way underdelivered. There were no accusations, charges, arrests made. They didn't even announce sanctions against China, which somehow became the crux of their argument, nor did they even disinvite Xi from the red carpet White House visit in this September. And then beyond that, I'm not sure that Americans are talking about an election from the better part of a decade ago. There was no mention of this war that the president started, is apparently unable to win, and potentially unable to end. There was no mention of the economic hardships, of the affordability issues that continue to plague this economy. But mostly, what I thought was astonishing was the simple yet extraordinary journalism from the Free Press, from actually MS Now's Vaughn Hilliard, who after the speech asked John Solomon, one of the key advisors, who apparently had to admit that none of this changed the outcome of the 2020 election, which saw Joe Biden legitimately win and become president. So again, a massive letdown, a bad night for the president, for the party, an extraordinary night for MS Now and journalism there.
I totally agree. Yvonne did a heck of a job and was relentless in pursuing those answers, which he got, to your point. So, Michael, House Democrats met before the speech to game plan their response. What can Democrats do to reassure voters who have concerns about any level of foreign influence? You know, to Matthew's point, the president brought up China. I mean, what does it say about the state of things that they might need to reassure Americans even at all? And how must they respond to Trump's efforts to meddling with the midterms? Take it away from the Democratic perspective.
It's shameful that we can't trust the president to do the right thing, but it's the reality. This is an all hands on deck moment where we need House Democrats and Senate Democrats and outside groups and voters to all work together to make sure that we have a free and fair election. House Democrats have met consecutively over the last several weeks, as have Senate Democrats, by the way, to come up with a strategy to make sure that we have a free and fair election. I think it's shameful, but it is where we are. I think that the real question here is this. What are congressional Republicans going to do? This shouldn't even be a partisan conversation. The idea that we have a free and fair election and we have a president who seems hell-bent on rigging that election should bring all of us together. But I should compliment Leader Jeffries and Mr. Schumer in terms of their leading this effort to try to pull people together to make sure that we have a plan. Donald Trump has told us what he's going to do. We have to make sure that he doesn't do it.
So, Matthew, a new Washington Post poll finds Trump's approval ratings hovering about in the 30s. It is in line with where he has been most of this year. But how damaging was this speech to Republicans, many of whom were reportedly already panicking?
Yeah, I mean, I think the upside for Republicans is that the speech was not broadcast far and wide. And there was even a concern, as you just alluded to, that it could have been far worse, even more dangerous or deranged claims about a previous election. Listen, as an American citizen, I believe we're going to have midterms. They are conducted by the states. They will be free. They will be fair. The American people will ensure that. But as a Republican, I am incredibly worried. When the president's poll numbers are around freezing, this does not bode well. Listen, neither party can get the engine to turn over. No one's working with a motor. But Republicans seem to just be in the breeze, putting a sail up, seeing where the wind takes you. Does the economy get better? How does the war go? Wherever Trump blows. Democrats, are swimming against that Trump tide, hoping they have a surfboard, hoping for a massive wave that will bring them back into power. Again, just from an enthusiasm level, as mentioned earlier, it seems as if the Republican and MAGA base is not as enthusiastic as that Democratic base, which will crawl over glass to go vote in the midterms. So again, not boding well for my party.
And Michael, Vice President J.D. Vance, as you know, he went on the Joe Rogan podcast this week and broke somewhat with President Trump on both Israel and definitely on the handling of the Epstein files. Let's watch this.
I say this with all candor, like, we absolutely screwed up the comms of the Epstein files, like we just did. But do I think the reason we screwed up the comms is because we were trying to hide something? No. I think Pam was trying to respond to the political moment. I think she overstated what we had and what we didn't have. There are some people within their system we know beyond a shadow of a doubt who are manipulating and trying to change American public opinion to keep the war going on indefinitely.
Do you think he would have continued with the most recent campaign if it wasn't for the influence of Israel?
Yes, I do.
Really?
I do.
Is this Vance trying to put some kind of daylight between himself and Trump's terrible poll numbers we were just talking about?
Kind of, but it's a red herring. I mean, he wasn't exactly forthright and honest. The reality is that the Epstein issue is not a messaging problem. The problem is that the sitting president and half the cabinet is in the Epstein files. The sitting president was friends with this guy. And so that is a real issue. I think he is trying to create some sort of daylight to a low information voter who doesn't really understand what's actually happening, which is the president, according to Jamie Raskin, is the most mentioned person in the Epstein files. That is the issue. But I do think that the vice president is trying to create some daylight. I don't know that it'll work. I think, I would have loved to see Joe Rogan ask him, for instance, why only half of the files have been released when a law was passed requiring all of them to be released. And so we'll see what happens. I do think that he was trying to create some daylight, but I don't think it'll be effective.
Okay. Matthew Bartlett and Michael Hardaway, it's good to see you both guys. See you next week. Thank you. The good news emerging in the aftermath of Donald Trump's election denial speech. There is important good news, and we're going to tell you about it. Todd Blanche's confirmation as Attorney General hangs in the balance as Donald Trump tries to put his former personal attorney at the head of the very department that is supposed to protect against election interference. Yet The Atlantic reports Trump's plans to subvert the midterm elections are failing. Courts, for one, are standing in the way. Most of his executive actions on elections, like requiring proof of citizenship and forcing mail-in ballots to be returned by Election Day, have been blocked. The DOJ has been denied 16 times by federal judges to access states' unredacted voter rolls. 7 of those judges are Trump appointees. Against this backdrop, the DHS secretary yesterday threatened prison time for state election officials.
If the election officials, once we gave them the information they need to secure their elections, and they chose not to, then those individuals can also be held accountable by fines, by penalties, and even, depending on how far it goes, prison time.
Joining me now, Ankush Khardori, former federal prosecutor and author of Open File, and always a welcome guest with us. So can I ask you quickly, what was he saying there when Markwayne Mullin says if we give them the information to secure their elections and they then don't do it, they could risk prison time? What would they give them?
You know, it's a very good question. I honestly don't know. I mean, maybe he's suggesting, you know, if we give you names of voters or something who shouldn't be on your rolls, I don't know. But this man is not, he was never qualified for this position, and he has no idea pretty much what he's talking about. He's there only because Trump wants a lackey in this position, and he seems to be serving his purpose. So I don't know what his actual objective was except to threaten people and to cause more confusion.
How about Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, whether or not he gets confirmed as AG? Will he go along with Mullin's threat? I mean, is it an empty threat? And does that even matter because the threat is being made?
I don't think it is an empty threat, or we cannot assume it's an empty threat. And in terms of what Todd Blanche is willing to do, we don't really have to speculate. He said during his confirmation hearing, essentially, that he thinks it is appropriate for the Attorney General, as a part of the executive branch, to take directions from the president. He has said that Americans should be happy that Trump has directed the Justice Department to pursue certain individuals who happen to be his political adversaries. And Todd Blanche has said that there is plenty of evidence that the 2020 election was rigged, which is, of course, a lie. So Blanche has demonstrated through his own actions and words that he is pliable, that he is willing to say and do things to keep his job and to get a promotion. So I would not assume that Blanche will say no to any of this. My understanding is he was in the audience or whatever in Trump's audience for the speech on Thursday night when he was back at it, suggesting that, you know, there was fraud around the 2020 election. So this is very worrisome to me, actually. The fact that both of these happen on the same week, not just Blanche's confirmation hearing, but on day 2 of that hearing, Trump offering up this speech that Blanche was in the audience for, I mean, we should be worried.
So for all of the DOJ's efforts to get states' unredacted voter rolls, they have been blocked by the states. Trump's executive actions on elections, they have been blocked. But a federal appeals court yesterday handed Trump a temporary win, at least, when it put on hold a lower court ruling preventing the Postal Service from restricting mail-in voting. Can the courts, Ankush, be counted on to rein in the president? I mean, is the biggest concern now messaging and intent or actuality of something being done?
Well, you know, I think we should all be vigilant and preparing for this, a bad scenario, right? And we're doing things like what you're doing and what the network has been doing, getting the word out, preparing people, fact-checking. That's an important part of it. And hopefully we'll do something to dissuade the administration from pulling off some of the worst tricks, like potentially going and trying to seize voting machines or calling certain election results into question. In terms of the courts, you know, yes, they have been doing a good job. Fortunately, it should not have fallen to them to do this, but it has fallen to them. You know, the worry I have is that, you know, around the midterms, you know, depending on what this administration is prepared to do, we could see a whole nother flurry of really disorienting sort of election-related litigation, This administration already went and got, voting records from Fulton County from the 2020 election through a search warrant application that appears to have been quite deficient and misleading. So, we have to be vigilant on all of these fronts, I think. And not just the courts, but also local law enforcement officials. I know MS Now has been reporting on this. Kevin Fry has been reporting on how they've been doing some preparations. I think it's sort of an all of the above kind of situation that needs to take place.
There's another bone of contention, or a point at least, where the administration stands on sending ICE officers to polling stations, which the president does not have the authority to even do. And here are Blanche's comments at his confirmation hearing this week, after which we're going to play what he said at CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference that was earlier this year. So listen to both.
Will you commit to following clear federal law and not deploying federal agents to polling locations?
I will commit to following the law, Senator, of course.
Okay, yes. But does that include not deploying federal agents to polling places?
I will absolutely follow the law no matter what it includes, so yes.
Why is there objection to sending ICE officers to polling places? Illegals can't vote.
So you flagged this in an article that you wrote this week. Do his actions speak louder than words? Is Blanche saying he'll follow the law to win over senators in his confirmation hearing? Because that line at CPAC has been repeated many times by Trump administration officials.
Yeah, I got to say, I'm so glad that you pulled this up, because I think Blanche was deliberately evasive. Klobuchar, I thought, could have pressed him a little harder, but he just said, we'll follow the law, we'll follow the law. But he didn't agree with her interpretation of it and how it might intersect with the president's, inherent constitutional authority. This administration is very big on asserting that the executive branch has all this inherent authority that supervenes statutory constraints. So I don't think anyone should take any kind of comfort from what Blanche said at his confirmation hearing. In fact, it worries me more, actually, that he appears to have intentionally tried to maintain some wiggle room around this, precisely because he had made those prior comments, and he does not appear ready to disavow them.
Okay. Ankush Khardori, always thank you much for your analysis. Appreciate it. We'll see you next week, I hope. Not in my backyard. There are protests happening right now, amplifying what could be one of the biggest midterm issues. We'll let you know what they are.
Center. And thank God.